You're listening to a previously aired episode of the Happier Life Project. We'll be back this September with an exciting brand new series. In the meantime, stay updated by following us on Instagram at MyPossibleSelf.
Hello, I'm Gabby. Welcome to another episode of the Happier Life Project, brought to you by the free award-winning mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self. Today, we are exploring emotions, where they come from, how they act as sources of information, how they might be influenced, not just by others, but also by ourselves, our past history and belief system. Is the emotional reaction we're having right now justified? Or could our brain and body be triggered by a memory of how we've reacted before to a certain situation? Can we therefore intercept and redirect challenging emotions? Or do we need to experience in order to process and move on? Once you start looking into this stuff, it's very complex, but luckily for us, we have the wonderful, award-winning clinical psychologist, lecturer, author and illustrator, Dr. Emma Hepburn, as our guest today to help us not only better understand and navigate our emotions, but also to share some practical tips, strategies and coping mechanisms so that when life throws us an inevitable curveball, we can take back some control of what might feel at the time pretty uncontrollable. Dr. Emma has written and illustrated the books A Toolkit for Happiness, A Toolkit for Modern Life, and more recently, and what we're going to focus on today, A Toolkit for Your Emotions, 45 Ways to Feel Better. She has also built up quite the impressive fan base on Instagram as the Psychology Mum. Dr. Emma believes how we understand and respond to our emotions is crucial and can influence our health and well-being across our lifespan. I found A Toolkit for Your Emotions to be such an insightful and helpful read. I highly recommend you checking it out. I think we could all do with learning some tools to help navigate the emotional roller coaster with all its loop-the-loops. Lean in and get ready to learn how to develop healthier emotional habits and some really important techniques to become better emotionally equipped. Ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started. Welcome, Dr. Emma Hepburn, to the Happier Life Project. Thrilled to be talking to you today, zooming in on emotions, which we haven't done on the podcast before yet. And after absolutely devouring your book in 2 days, which we'll get into, I didn't realise how complex it is.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a lot more complex than we think once we start thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we are going to sort of get into that. But I did have one question first. You know, I'm sure having a very busy career working as a psychologist and working within the NHS as well and dealing with people from all walks of life and some people that are maybe really struggling with their mental health and very, very poorly. Then your books, we've got A Toolkit for Happiness, A Toolkit for Modern Life, more recently, A Toolkit for Emotions. These are so accessible and digestible. And I think a big takeaway for me was that, like, well, we all have our mental health problems. And it just, everything that I read, it was like, well, this applies to absolutely everybody. And it really kind of makes you think about, you know, how the things that come up, like thoughts and emotions, we don't really know how to deal with them, do we? So was this what inspired you to write these kinds of books?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, as you say, I've seen lots and lots of people. And one of the themes, there's lots of themes that come out, but one of the themes was that people were feeling really bad. Mm-hmm. And then they'd feel bad for feeling bad. It's like, I shouldn't be feeling this way. They'd beat themselves up for feeling a certain way, or they've gone through something really terrible. They go, oh, I should be coping with this. And I'm like, well, actually, it's pretty difficult, and so your emotions are normal in response to that, even though they're difficult to deal with. So I think I started thinking about what is it we do in a clinic room that people could benefit from kind of before it gets to the point where they have to come to see a psychologist or somebody else. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all may have to do that at some point. But what can be put in place to help support people to kind of maintain their mental health, or when they're going through a tough time, how can they respond to that in a helpful way as possible? How can we make those techniques kind of accessible to everybody?
Well, you certainly did that, and we are going to dive in, but I think it would be really cool first to kind of just look at emotions, because we don't really we know we experience them, but like we don't stop and think, what actually are they? Where do they come from? I mean, we'd be robots, wouldn't we, if we didn't have emotions?
Absolutely. And I think you've hit on something really, really important. They are a fundamental part of your brain functioning. So there's nothing wrong with having emotions, but we need to have emotions. But what are emotions seems like a really, really simple question. There's actually quite a complex answer, because what we've understood as emotions, even in my career, which has been spanned 20 plus years, our idea of emotions and the science around emotions has changed dramatically. So what I understood as emotions when I kind of set off in my undergraduate, postgraduate career, and what I was taught, because that was a science at the time, which was we all have these basic emotions. They're tied into specific parts of the brain, that we have facial expressions that go alongside them, and they're universal across all the humans in the world. That's what we were taught, so that's what the science said. There was nothing wrong with that. It's just that the science has been updated, because that's what science does. So in the last 10 years or so, 10 to 15 years, how we understand emotions has totally shifted. So we don't have universal emotions. Emotions are our brain predicting how we need to respond in a certain situation. And because our brain predicts on past experience, and we all have different past experiences, it will be different for everybody. So the base of emotions are these bodily sensations, are how we feel. And that's due to these predictions, but also how we feel generally in life. So for example, if you are going through a period of illness, you'll feel worse because that's how you experience, that's how it makes your body feel. So there's lots of things that can impact on how we feel in our body. And then our brain makes sense of these by labeling them as emotions. So it might at some point say, well, I'm ill, and label a feeling as I'm ill. But another time it might say, well, actually, no, I'm down. So it's labeling your emotions or labeling your bodily sensations with language, which makes it an emotion. And what we know now is that these emotions are very culturally defined. So how we label emotions in the Western world, which has probably become the dominant view, is not necessarily how it's labelled in different cultures. They're different across cultures. And everyone's experience of emotions is slightly different. It's not tied into a particular brain region. We can't define it by a specific thing. It's a label we put on that sensations we're feeling in our body, which makes them really diverse and unique for everybody and different cross cultures. And I guess also what that means is when you describe anger or anxiety, it might be different to what I'm describing, how I'm experiencing it. So it's a broad range of how we might experience emotions. But what we do know is that these sensations, how we feel, are just a fundamental part. So that's the core part, is we feel sensations. The core part is not the emotions that we all experience the same. The core part that all humans experience is some level of feeling, or what we call affect. And how we label those and how we construct those are very unique and individual, and also culturally defined as well. So I've tried to distill lots of complex research into the description there, but I guess what I'd add is I've had to have a massive shift in my understanding of emotions, and the core researcher at the heart of this is somebody called Lisa Feldman Barrett, and I have read her book, I'd say about 20 times. Particular chapters I've probably read over maybe 30 times, because I found some of it really hard to understand and read. So making that science, she's a brilliant researcher and it's a brilliant book, but it's quite hard to shift your thinking to understand this new science. So trying to make that science accessible in my book it looks like a really simple book, but actually trying to take this really complex science and make it understandable and accessible was really hard.
Well, you did a fantastic job because, and thank you for that explanation there as well. But yeah, and obviously with your illustrations as well, that helps to kind of reinforce your words and your teachings of something that you just explained is very complex. But I found it not just really fascinating, but also really helpful to think about it that way. Because sometimes I think, well, a lot of times people think, oh, why am I feeling like this? Or I don't want to be feeling like this. We're talking about the more unpleasant to experience emotions, should we say. And you might also be like, well, why am I feeling like this? But I know my friend wouldn't feel like this if they were me. And understanding now that it comes from like maybe even as far back as like when we were children, our experiences, the context of how we were raised. And when you actually look at the history and then your brain is like making sense of it all, and then it's signaling your body in a way how to feel, because like you said, it's just labeled it. Oh, well, they need to feel anxious about this. So then we're going to send a message to the body. So you get like butterflies in your stomach. Whereas for somebody else, it might be absolutely nothing and not even worth categorizing maybe.
Absolutely. And I think also we all have different bodies. So, how our bodies react to different things. We have different immune systems. We have different, kind of physical capabilities. So those sensations that arise in our bodies are massively different for everybody as well. So our brains and our bodies are so complex, and no two brains or bodies are exactly the same.
Yeah. So then in terms of like trying to be more comfortable with our emotions, do you think, let's get the cliches out of the way, is there such thing as being too emotional or emotionally unavailable on the other side of the scale?
I think it's difficult to say how people, there's a wrong with emotions. I don't think we should be saying there's a wrong way to express or deal or have emotions. I guess that's, because you say somebody's emotionally unavailable, somebody's got too much emotions. Well, that's how they are. And everybody's different. Some people experience emotions in bigger ways. Some people let their emotions out more. Some people don't experience emotions in the same way, or some people keep their emotions in more. So I think there's ultimately helpful ways you can deal with those emotions, or unhelpful ways you can deal with those emotions. But actually, in terms of how people present, it is, like I say, every brain is totally different. So if we start saying somebody, and the classic, too emotional, I hear that a lot with children, or they're just being too emotional. I was like, well, what does that mean? Where's the right level of emotions? What are you defining that as? I think that comes into a lot of the myths about emotions, about how we should and shouldn't be. And that also, those myths and those societal beliefs then influence what we tell ourselves, which can become unhelpful.
Yeah, but then would you say it's unhelpful to suppress emotions, and maybe this emotional unavailability or whatever comes a little bit from that, because it tends to, I don't want to get myself into trouble saying the wrong thing, but it tends to be more men, right, that fall into this emotional unavailable.
Yeah, I think there's certainly sex differences, and lots of research just to back that up in terms of how we believe people should experience emotions. So it's more acceptable for a man to be angry. That's what the research says. Right. It's more acceptable for women to be anxious. There's certain kind of societal beliefs, and these are Western beliefs I'm talking about particularly, that research shows that that we do believe, and also that we have this belief that women are more emotional. So it's more acceptable generally for women to be emotional, but that also could be seen as problematic. Women are too emotional. So these beliefs come out in how we shape our emotions and what we show and how we experience them, because that's a cultural belief, and that influences, as we're growing up and as we're adults, how we experience and how we express emotions. But yet we know that actually men and women can experience emotions in pretty much their brains are not hugely different in terms of how they function. So actually men and women both experience emotions.
So would you say emotions are objective then? Because can we pin different beliefs on them? I guess we can, because of what we talked about, like the context of how we grew up or previous experiences in similar situations. So could you be swayed by your emotions maybe?
So I guess there's two parts to that. Are emotions objective? I think there's the experience of emotions, which is fundamentally, a subjective part of our brain, and understanding it. But I think there's also the myth that emotions are something that, we've got this myth of kind of the emotional brain and the subjective rational brain, and emotions override our kind of a rational brain. But actually what the science tells us is we need emotions as part of understanding the world. It's not that there's emotions in this intellectual brain. Right. They're the same thing. So therefore we will, we need emotions to make decisions. We need emotions to understand danger. And if we took away emotions, our brains would actually function a lot, or they wouldn't function at all. We wouldn't function as people. So, I think the myth that emotions are something irrational is really unhelpful, because emotions help us respond helpfully to the world generally.
We know that the brain, when we're talking about thoughts, we tend to have more, we do have more thoughts that lean towards the negative rather than the positive. Like, we know that, we've covered that a lot on the podcast. Is that the same with emotions then? We tend to lead towards more negative feeling emotions than positive ones too?
Well, yes. There's lots of research on that. A really famous paper in psychology called Bad is Stronger Than Good. And that exactly what you talk about there with the negativity bias. So we're more likely to spot those negative things. Why? Because we need to spot them to survive. But also what we know is the physiological effects of what might make us feel, fearful or bad do last longer than those kind of feel good emotions. So exactly what you're saying, the physiology of those emotions which are required but don't necessarily make us feel good do last longer.
Yeah, well, we can, with them, if we're going to call them bad, and I know you don't like to use the term bad, but negative emotions, like if we're sad, we can wallow. If we're angry, we can stew over it. But then there doesn't seem to be the equivalent for joy. If we're joyful, we're staying joyful. There isn't, we've not even given it the language that we have for the negative emotion. Yeah. So that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I, in the book, as you'll see, that I break down kind of feel good, unpleasant and pleasant emotions. But that's how I tend to describe it, because they're both required. Yeah. But actually trying to find those words for joyous and happy emotions and break them down, we break them down a lot less, whereas we really break down the difficult emotions. Yeah. But also, that might be a kind of helpful thing, because those are the emotions, although we need to build up those feel-good emotions, we also break down and understand those unhelpful emotions and get through them. That's a really critical part of life. So perhaps we've kind of gone through, our attention's given to them, and then we need to try and understand it, which is why we have those words, because breaking down emotions, understand them in really fine detail, is a critical part of responding and coping with emotions.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this episode, they'll be wanting me to ask you about how to cope better with these difficult emotions. But before I do ask you that, I think it's important to also acknowledge that we try to either self-soothe or shove them down or avoid because we don't like the feeling, do we?
Right. Would you ever meet somebody who says, oh, great, I'm feeling sad today, or great, I'm feeling anxious? No, it's not pleasant. So what's the most natural view of something that's unpleasant? We want to get away from it. We want to shove it away. So, but what we know is if we, and you mentioned suppressing earlier on, is if we try to shove them away, actually it makes us more stressed. It creates more difficult emotions. It makes our body physiologically more stressed. It doesn't go away. It just kind of sits there and hangs around. So fundamentally avoiding emotions, suppressing them, pushing away, it can work short term. Sometimes we need to get through something short term, but long term, that's your long term coping strategy. It's generally pretty unhelpful.
Yeah. In the book, you refer to, I think, almost on every page about the emotional roller coaster, and that's sort of backed up with your really cool illustrations. And something I definitely thought was worth sharing with our listeners as well was about the emotional loop, the loop. So getting stuck on the same things. And usually, again, it's not like, oh, I'm stuck on happiness. Whee! It's like, exactly. I'm stuck on.
Yeah, and that's based on that. But, often the natural things we do in response to emotions can actually make them worse. And it's really interesting because when we're anxious, we want to get away from things, and we know avoidance, fundamentally, it gives you massive relief straight away, but it ultimately makes your brain, more likely to feel anxious about that thing in the future. So the most natural thing to do with anxiety, ironically, makes us feel worse longer term. Relief in the short term. And with sadness, when you're feeling sad, you just don't feel like doing things. You don't feel like seeing people. So you want to kind of close down. It's totally natural. You want to get away. But ironically, you're getting away from all the things that might make you feel a bit better. So it's recognizing, it's not blaming yourself, because it's a very natural response to these emotions. It's what your emotions are always making you do, ironically. But then you get caught in the loop of, you do these things, then you get back into the motion. You do this thing, you get back into the motion. So it's looking at what are the pathways we can take off the loop, rather than getting stuck in it.
Yeah. So taking that thread and running with it, is detachment a technique that we could try? Like, with the inner critic and the negative thoughts, they say try to imagine putting them on a leaf on the stream and letting the stream float down. I don't know if it's so easy to detangle from a feeling rather than a thought. Please tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, I personally use the term detachment. That seems to imply you're kind of separating yourself from your emotions. But I think, what we did describe is a really nice kind of riding the wave of emotions, because you use the analogy of a stream, which I really like. Mm-hmm. And I would say, if we kind of if we get caught in the wave, we get pushed along by the emotion. So we don't, we're just kind of in the emotion. We're kind of we're not even thinking about it. We're getting pushed along by it rather than riding it. Whereas if we step back and go, oh, I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling anxious. And so that's the first thing, is noticing how you're feeling. You can say, okay, that wave is here, that wave is coming. And instead of being pushed along by it, you almost step back and say, right, okay, I need to recognize I'm feeling anxious. Kind of letting the feeling ride through your body, letting your feeling ride through you, and thinking, what can I do about this? Or maybe you don't have to do anything at that point. You just need to recognize it. Sometimes just recognizing, noticing it, and riding along the wave can help. But sometimes you might need to say, well, how can I respond helpfully? Or is there anything I'm doing that's getting me stuck in the wave, like being really critical, or tell myself I shouldn't feel this way? Is there a way to help me ride that wave rather than being pushed along by this wave of sadness or anger or anxiety? So I think that's kind of the same analogy, really, which can be helpful.
Yeah, I was doing a yoga class recently, and the teacher always starts with like a bit of a explanation on the theme. And I think she was quoting Buddha when I can't remember the entire story, but I really like the line about not attaching a story onto the story. And that's can be what actually causes way more pain than the story itself. And I wonder again, like bringing emotions into it. And the podcast after this one is going to be all about the correlation between modern dating and mental health. These terms like breadcrumbing and love bombing and ghosting, and something like that might have happened, but we don't really know the person enough to know exactly why we've experienced this behavior. So our brain attaches a story onto the story. I'm not good enough. It's usually about self-worth, isn't it? Like they found somebody else, whatever it is, which we don't actually know. But then the feeling comes, and then we feel really down and sad. And then we can get stuck in this kind of loop. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, stories are absolutely essential for humans to make sense of their experience. Yeah. But sometimes those stories can become unhelpful. And you've just tapped into some really lovely ones there. Well, not so lovely when you experience them, but really nice ones to describe about I'm this kind of person, or I can't do this, or I should be doing this, or I shouldn't be doing this. And we can do the same with emotions. So we experience emotion and we tell ourselves, I shouldn't be experiencing this. I'm such a emotional person. Nobody else feels this way. So we start to tell ourselves stories about our own emotions, and detaching that story. It's like you say, not putting a story on a story, detach yourself from that story, or stepping back from the story and saying, what story am I telling myself about this? Can be really helpful. Yeah. And I've got an illustration in the book about the test tube, where you put your beliefs about emotions into it. You say, but what actually are the kind of scientific beliefs about emotion? And I think that can help you to kind of step back from your story, because you're saying, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I'm so emotional. And you can start to say, actually, I'm feeling this way because something's happened and that's how my brain's responding to it. It's predicting this. I'm actually telling myself a story about it.
Might have happened before. It's a past experience as well.
Absolutely. And so you start to understand it. And actually, of course, my brain's reacting like that. There's nothing wrong with reacting like that. It's perfectly normal. It's perfectly human, because why would my brain not react like that? It's a human brain.
There's the saying, you are not your thoughts. So does that apply to your emotions too?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just kind of similar to that nice story you were given about who you are and your worth. If you say, I'm a depressive, for example, or I'm an anxious person, you get really entangled in those emotions that start to become part of your identity. And if you start to say, I'm experiencing anxiety, you're stepping back from it rather than, I'm an anxious person. You start to say, I'm experiencing anxiety. You almost separate yourself from the emotion. And these emotions pass through you. You're not the emotion, but they're passing like clouds and weather. And sometimes that weather might stay. Sometimes we might get winter and that weather might stay for a long time, but it's not you. And that's really critical, particularly, I think, in things like when somebody experiences a mental health difficulty and depression, because people start to think that's part of their personality. This is just me. There's nothing wrong with me. I shouldn't be seeking help. This is just me. This is just who I am. And you start to say, well, actually, this is something you're experiencing, your brains and your body's experiencing right now, but it's a winter. It's it's experience you're having at this time, and you will come through that. You start to kind of say, you're not this mood, you're not this emotion. It's part of your experience. It comes and goes, and it might stay for longer, might go for longer, but we are constantly, shifting throughout emotions every day, every minute, every week, every year.
Yeah.
It's not a fundamental kind of part of who you are.
Do we need to create more of a safe space for our emotions to live in? Like, if you think about a car, when I lived in America, I think it was every 6 months I had to take it into the mechanics, and it was like a freshen up, basically. So I don't know what the equivalent would be in the UK, because they'd like pump the tires full of air.
Service. Yeah, a service.
Yeah, like a service. Yeah, they'd do all the. You can tell I'm not car-y, can't you?
I don't have any much more terminology about cars than that.
I should have used a different example, but making sure everything is ticking along. Yeah, exactly. Should we be more mindful of our emotions, and what are some of the signs that our emotions or nervous system might be trying to get our attention?
Yeah, I love the idea of a safe space. I think that's really nice, a really nice analogy, and kind of also keeping an eye on them is or the service is a really nice analogy as well. I think both those are really helpful, because if we start to notice our emotions more and we start to kind of understand our emotions more, we can think about what they're signaling to us. What are they telling us? If we start to feel, notice we're feeling depleted, we can take a break. Whereas if we ignore that, we'll never notice that signal, because emotions can be indicators or signals. And if you ignore, the warning light in your car that comes on, you'll have to be in for a service much quicker. But I also like the idea of, kind of noticing when something's wrong. And I think that's tied in with kind of being mindful, because if we're mindful of our emotions, we don't have to wait to that point where it's going, red light flashing, you're not good. We start to notice that things change at an earlier level or an earlier stage, and we can do something about it before we need to put in the garage for a full, overhaul.
Yeah. Regulating your emotions. I wondered, for me, breath work is a complete game changer. Yeah. And again, it does tend to be when it's the more negative ones, I suffer from anxiety, so that's for me, that's such a great one to just calm everything down. Yeah. What about regulating emotions? What are some of your favorite go-tos?
Again, I think, I really like the fact you use breath work, because that just shows that emotions are not just in your brain, they're a physical experience and a physical sensation.
Yeah.
I like yoga and kind of stretching and breath work as well. I love doing that when I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. For me, though, it's also just getting out and noticing that you're feeling, you're feeling whatever, your emotions are shifting, and getting out of the situation, go for a walk. That for me is always, particularly when it's nice weather, that for me just calms me down, gets me out of nature, just gets my brain shifted from whatever it is, And also having space, get off my phone is a really good one as well. And just shifting and getting away from the thing, having a break. For me, it's getting out of it. But again, I think that's also really physical, because I'm out walking, I'm out doing something, but it's also an attentional shift as well.
I'm curious to know what you think about the influence of social media and just being online and our emotions.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because I think there are, of course, benefits to social media in terms of people finding community. I mean, I'm going to be upfront, my books wouldn't exist without social media. So that's come through me starting to post on Instagram and thinking, should I be doing this? Let's give it a try. So there are huge benefits to that, but also there's lots of things we need to watch out for. We can be on it too much, it become habitual use, and then we're always kind of, we're not controlling what's going into our system. We're watching things which maybe are unhelpful to us, can be quite traumatic at times, or we can get drawn into kind of, people talk a lot about those unhelpful comparisons, about looking at other people and seeing that they're living these perfect lives. And so it can influence our emotions, but also it can take away from creating positive emotions at times, because if we're constantly on our phone, it takes away, or computer, whatever it is, it takes away from doing the things which actually create positive emotions. So I think it's about, it's not seeing social media as something that's fundamentally bad, but it's recognizing that it can become habitual, and that can get in the way of real life. And it can take a lot of your attention, and that can take away from kind of, your social interactions, your, just getting outside, doing things which make you feel good. So it's recognizing, it's being mindful of how it's impacting your emotions while you're using it. Maybe, I certainly have no notifications on social media. I switch everything off. I choose when I go on it. It still becomes habitual at times because it's hard not to, but I have controls and limits on it. So I use it at certain times.
Because we are part of a mental health and wellness app, I think most people listening would really love a couple of helpful tools. And we're going to obviously point to the book, because I think there's so many amazing, there's 45, right? But for the more uncomfortable emotions, if we could talk through a couple of the big ones. So let's start with anxiety. Yeah. We're feeling anxious. Maybe it is that knot in your stomach, or it's sort of pins and needles sensation, or it's the heart beating fast, or you feel like it's the emotion of anxiety. What have you found to be helpful when you're working through your patients in this regard?
Yeah, so I think we can look at different aspects of it. And first of all, understanding the triggers, understanding the experience of anxiety, noticing when you're becoming anxious. So I think that noticing is critical for all emotions, understanding what's going on and understanding your body and how you experience it, because once you understand that, it's less scary and it makes more sense, because you're understanding why you're experiencing that. And ultimately, is your brain predicting where you need to use your energy and how you need to use your energy. That's what anxiety is. It's your brain predicting you need lots of energy for this experience, whatever it's going to be, and it starts creating all these physical sensations. And then you can look at things in different ways. You can look at what you do, how you're thinking, and your physical kind of sensations. And you've given some really nice examples of we can respond to those physical sensations because you've got an increased heartbeat, increased energy, your breathing becomes more rapid. So we can find ways to manage that through breathing, or even just kind of using some of the energy by dancing, going out for a walk. Those are really good ways to do it. So there's, stretching, lots of ways you can do it. Yoga, some people find helpful. So we can respond to it physically.
Yeah.
We can look at our thinking and what it's telling us. So are we telling ourselves that this is going to be a disaster, that it's going to be terrible? Because anxiety thinking gets us more focused and becomes more kind of future oriented into a negative. So we can kind of respond to our thinking and look at what it's telling us. Are we kind of catastrophizing and jumping 20 miles ahead into the future and telling us it's going to be a disaster? Yeah. How can we draw that back? How can we respond to it? Or are we being really critical, where we need to develop more kind of self-compassion and a kinder inner voice? Are we telling ourselves we've done something terrible? But actually, is it that terrible? And is anybody going to remember it tomorrow? So there's lots of ways we can look at our thinking. And that's what we do when we're anxious. Because do we, I've talked about avoidance. Do we avoid everything? Again, there's times when, longer term, it makes our brain more likely to predict that we need to kind of feel anxious in the future. So there are ways we can reduce that, to gradually kind of help our brain predict better? What do we do when we're anxious? Do we sit and look at our phone constantly, which just keeps that cycle going? Can we get out of that loop? What is keeping you in that loop, the loop?
That was going to be my follow-up question, was the loop of anxiety is just, yeah. How the heck do we stop that bad boy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's thinking, because it's all very individual. What's making you? Do you kind of sit and for example, for health concerns, we'll often sit and Google and try and find the answers for uncertainty. We might look at our phone constantly, and sometimes it's just kind of thinking, what am I doing that's getting me stuck in this? And it could be very individual. What could I do slightly differently? And that could be short-term when you experience anxiety, but also in your wider context. What can I do kind of in my daily life that actually helps me calm and regulate on a more longer term basis? So do I need to take more breaks? Do I need to go outside more? Physically, when you experience anxiety, what do you do? But also longer term, how can we manage that? But what I would say is there's not a one size fits all approach, because what you do with sitting in a clinic with somebody is you'd work out their individual, we call it a formulation in psychology, of what's going on for them. What's their loop to loop? What are they doing? That because if we do helpful things, they'll be doing unhelpful things. That's human. We all do unhelpful things when we experience emotions. How can we increase the things they're doing well and mitigate or support those things that people are, that are maintaining their difficulties? And those will be different for everybody. Although there's some generic things that are really helpful, it's really individualized, and you can work some of that yourself, but sometimes you might need support working that out.
Also, you could apply that to sadness when you're feeling low, lonely, grief, loss.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it kind of hit home a bit to me that you say in the book about to do what's right for you or to get yourself out of it. Like, again, we touched upon the whole thing of wallowing. Like, you might want to isolate, you might not want to be the Debbie Downer if you are invited to join friends or family for something. So you want to retreat, or you just might feel like you don't want to put on a show, pretending you're okay when you're not feeling that. So you sort of lock yourself away. But you were saying you kind of need to push past that in order to break through how you're feeling.
I mean, I think it's really difficult, isn't it? Because sometimes actually kind of just cozying up in a blanket and cancelling, going to a party might be the right thing for you. Maybe you need a break. Other times it might be actually I need to just kind of push myself a little bit here because anxiety is telling me, or depression or low mood is telling me I need to avoid that. But actually if I go, then it might be better. And the thing is, we all get these decisions wrong. It's not a perfect, you should do this, because sometimes we might go to the party and think, I'd rather just stay in my blanket. Another time we might stay there and actually go to the party would have been helpful to us. So it's really kind of trying to do what's best at that point in time, but also recognizing everybody gets it wrong and not beating yourself up about, if you do feel bad doing something. It's just like, well, let's see what we can learn from that for next time. Because actually, it's not an exact science of I should do this at this point. It's what's right for me at this point. What would be the best thing for me at this point? And we're predicting what would be the best thing. And predictions aren't always right. So we'll sometimes get those predictions wrong.
How do you feel then about like shame and embarrassment and our self-worth? Because that can feel icky, can't it? Like you're like, cringe, good. And then again, it's the loops, isn't it? I wish we could find out how to get into a loop of joy and elation, but it just seems to be the bad ones or the negative ones.
Shame is a really interesting thing. And interestingly, we often shame ourselves about emotions. So that's something we really look out for. So we'll have an emotion and we'll shame ourselves. What an idiot feeling this way. You shouldn't be feeling this way. Nobody else feels this way. So I think shaming yourself about your emotions is really something to look out for. And recognizing that actually everybody does feel that way at times. We all experience things slightly differently, but there is no shame in experiencing emotions. They are just part of life. So that's something to look out for. But shame is an emotion as well. We talked about sadness and low mood kind of make you hide, but shame really wants to hide. And I drop like an onion. And the more we hide it, the bigger it grows. So it tells us there's something wrong with us. There's something that we're fundamentally wrong with our worth and who we are as people. And the more we hide it, the less exposure it gets to the light, the bigger it grows. Once we start exposing that, and that could be something that we might talk to friends about, I've been feeling really sad about this. Suddenly they go, oh gosh, and I was feeling really sad about something too. You know, I felt depressed at times. I felt anxious at times. Suddenly we realized it's not just us. You know, it's actually quite common, and we use the term common humanity. We all experience it. And when we start to expose shame to the light, it starts to shrink because we know it's not about us. It's just something that everybody experiences. Now, I'm going to caveat that because some things feel so difficult that we might need help in, you know, a psychological input or a medical professional to help peel those layers back, particularly with something really difficult or something that, you know, you've kept down for a long time, a really traumatic experience. Sometimes we need support and it can take a long time to do that. So I'm not suggesting everybody goes out and talks about everything with anybody. I'm just saying that that's the kind of theory, is that shame, as you open it up, reduces, and hiding it helps it grow and become part of, you know, makes it feel like it's just you and you're different and there's something wrong with you.
What's your favourite tool in your own toolkit for emotions?
I like naming emotions. I became a little bit, I talk about in the book how when I was younger, and I didn't actually realize what I was doing, but I started to almost collect emotion words because I find it really fascinating how we have different words in different cultures. And I love that, discovering a word that describes something that you go, oh yes, I feel that. I never had a word for it. Mm-hmm. We know that being able to fine tune your emotions and give them really, so rather than just feeling, I feel bad, can I say, well, actually, I'm feeling jealous, or I'm feeling shameful, or I'm feeling, you know, isolated. Fine tuning your emotions with specific words is really beneficial because it kind of helps you know what to do about them. And my favorite is probably thinking about, you know, what I call sieving your emotion, breaking it down from this lump of I feel bad, I feel mad, to sieving it down further. And there's so many nice words out there to describe emotions. So that's probably my favorite technique, really kind of focusing how I'm feeling and describing it. And then that helps you because ultimately emotions are I talked about the language earlier on, but why do we have these language for emotions? So we know what to do with these sensations we're having in a helpful way. So we label our emotions, label these sensations so we know what to do about them. The better we label them, the more it tells us what we can do about them. So I really like that.
It's really interesting as well. Like we can't, unless we're a mind reader, we can't really read people's thoughts, but we can read their emotions, or we can feel their emotions, certainly, can't we? Like other people's emotions can certainly influence our own.
Yeah, and some people are more in tune to that than others. But also what we know is we can influence positively other people's emotions and how they're feeling. So a cuddle, for example, can help people calm down. Just the words you're saying, if you speak kindly to somebody, it helps kind of, you know, it changes their body. A nice text to a friend, a nice voice message can really help. So we influence each other's emotions all the time, and we can also kind of co-regulate and support each other's emotions through that knowledge. Yeah,
I highlighted in the book the line, our words hold power to inflict emotional damage or heal emotional pain.
Yeah,
so lovely. So as we're kind of wrapping up this conversation, I'd love to share, if it's cool with you, the last line in the book. Speaking of emotions, I got choked up when I read it.
Yeah, go for it.
Emotions are at the heart of what it means to be human. And I was like, oh, why do I feel emotional? Feel emotional.
It's so normalising, doesn't it? It's so normalising that if it's just human to have emotions, well, there's nothing wrong with us if we experience emotions, and we all experience it. And it's just part of who we are and part of how we function.
This has been so wonderful. Thank you so much. I can't let you go until we do the Happier Life Project's last 5 in 5. So it's the same 5 quick fire kind of questions that I ask every guest to wrap up the episode. When and where are you at your happiest?
In my garden with my children, particularly on a sunny day. I just love being outside, and I love seeing flowers bloom and, you know, plants growing, and with my children and my family. So that's my happiest.
You know, every single guest that I ask, it's always something very simple and very wholesome, and usually outside.
Yeah,
it's
really?
Like it's nobody says, oh, it's, you know, when I'm on a yacht in the south of France, you know.
That's simple. That's my ideal day.
Yeah. What's your favourite thing to do that nourishes your mental health?
Oh, that's a nice one. Again, I'm going to come back to I love having a garden. I love growing things. It really just seeing things emerge. I'm looking at flowers right now. So I think nourishing something else in the garden nourishes me. It just makes me so happy to see the flowers. But the thing I do every morning, and I actually didn't intentionally do it, but I've started to do it now. I realized to do it. I go out with a cup of tea in the garden and I see what's come out and what's changed. And it's almost like a routine or a ritual. It's part of my day before I do anything. Get the kids to school, make a cup of tea, go out my garden, what's changed in the garden today. And it's just, I love it. It almost kind of sets me up for the day.
Oh, that sounds lovely. What piece of advice do you now know that you wished somebody would have told you earlier that would have made you a happier person?
Oh, that's good. Well, I as you can tell from the accent, I'm Scottish. We don't really talk about emotions much in Scotland, or we didn't certainly in the 1980s when I was growing up. So I wish somebody had told me that actually kind of getting to know my emotions and understanding my emotions would have been hugely beneficial to me. I didn't have a vocabulary when I was a teenager, and I've developed that through my work. But I wish somebody had told me that when I was younger. And I think kids do get told that now, which is fantastic.
What is the most important one thing that needs to change to make the world a happier place?
Oh, well, that's a big question.
A loaded question.
Why? I mean, I think for me, it's recognizing that mental health is not just an individual thing. How we build societies influences how people feel and how their experiences. So taking mental health, obviously, individual treatment and support is really critical, but taking mental health and making it a wider systemic thing and recognizing that everything we do influences how people feel. So we need to build societies which support people, and that's how we create well societies.
Last question. What is a simple, actionable step we can take when it comes to becoming better emotionally equipped to manage strong feelings that will help us on our journey to building a happier life?
I think becoming friends with our emotions, even ones we don't want. I think stopping and noticing how you're feeling, understanding how you're feeling, just getting to know your emotions, labeling them, understanding them, and not shaming yourself for them.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you again. So to find and follow you on social media, because you've got a massive social media following, you're the Psychology Mum. A toolkit for your emotions, 45 ways to feel better, is available most places, wherever you get your books from. And you've also got the emotional first aid kit, and that's 45 cards for self-care, which I think is, you're a great drawer too. So, I highly encourage anybody listening to dig into this stuff, because it's something I'm going to be returning back to for sure.
I think you can just, you can just pick up one card or one part of the book and think, how can I use that? You don't need to read everything. Just even learning one or two techniques can be hugely helpful.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Thank you, Dr. Emma. Super appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Happier Life Project with me, Gabby Sanderson. And thanks again to the wonderful Dr. Emma Hepburn. I'll say it one more time. I really recommend you checking out A Toolkit for Your Emotions, 45 Ways to Feel Better. Just one more minute of your time, please, and that's for the important housekeeping. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. If you are in crisis or you think you may have an emergency, please do call your doctor or the emergency services immediately. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, which is me, and the interviewees. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. Our partners at the Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. If you don't listen to the Happier Life Project directly on the My Possible Self app, please do subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. And if you so have a minute of free time, leave a review if you found this episode helpful. It helps us to grow and to help others that might also need some tools and tips and advice on their mental health journey. And to find and follow us on social media, if you're not already there, we are most active on Instagram, and you can find us at mypossibleself, and I've been at Radio Gabby. Do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.